This is Covering the Spread, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.
We are now just 2 days away from the semifinals of the college football playoffs. We've got the matchup set. It is Notre Dame taking on Penn State and Ohio State versus Texas. It is time to dig in and break down both those games. We got Riley Thomas here today. He's going to break down his thoughts on both those games, talking about the spread and the total, but also player props he likes for this week in the college football playoff semifinals. Welcome on into Covering the Spread, a FanDuel Research podcast. My name is JimSannes. I am a managing editor for FanDuel Research, joined here as mentioned by Riley Thomas. You can find him on X at _Riley. Check out his work at FanDuel Research, where he is a writer for us. Riley, happy semifinals to you. How you doing today?
Doing great, especially with the way Ohio State's playing. Couldn't ask for much more, that's for sure.
Were you bored during the Rose Bowl? Was it? I know that like you're an Ohio State fan, so it's like, oh, cool, they're romping. Did it get to the point where you're bored though?
I'm never that person. Like I enjoy every single second of it. I remember like back, I guess 10 years ago now when they played Wisconsin. Yeah. In the Big Ten title game, they won like 59-0. Loved every single second of it. Like I will never get bored in a blowout ever.
I think that might have been the game where my brother-in-law got food poisoning. He was in the Wisconsin band, and he got food poisoning on the bus back. I can't remember if it was that year or they went the year after too, I think. So he might have welcomed some boredom, I think, at that point. But hey, it's a good problem to have. If it's a massive blowout, you can kind of coast. That'd be great. Not sure we'll get that this week, though. We're going to talk about that game. So Ohio State facing Texas. Texas a bit uneasy against Arizona State. So we'll talk about that matchup there, but also break down Notre Dame Penn State to get you ready for the semifinals this week. But first, a reminder to make sure you are subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. My thoughts on all 6 NFL wildcard weekend games already posted. Went game by game, broke down my models, spread and total predictions, and my best bets at FanDuel Sportsbook. Can find that up on the Covering the Spread podcast feed wherever you get your podcast. Later on this week on Thursday, Megan Payton will join us breaking down her thoughts on the wildcard weekend, and on Friday talking NFL player props as well, all right here in this same podcast feed. So search for Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. Hit subscribe, and if you like what you hear, leave us a 5-star rating and review. Of course, these shows also do go on our brand new YouTube page. This one here today, back with you Thursday, 10 a.m. Eastern, breaking down NFL DFS of the wildcard round with Brian Gadula, 4 p.m. on Thursday with Megan Payton, and then 10 a.m. on Friday talking player props for the wildcard round as well. Turn on notifications on the YouTube page to get notified as we go live throughout the week. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 or get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. Plus, when you win, you'll get paid instantly. Get started with $200 in bonus bets. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. For Kansas, an affiliation with Kansas Star Casino, or 18 plus and present in DC. First online real money wager only. $5 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets, which expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Or visit FanDuel.com/RG. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/Chat Connecticut. Visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-OPEN-Y or text OPEN-Y in New York. Now, Riley, before we dig into the playoff games, I do want to talk about what we've seen thus far. Obviously, Ohio State going nuts against Oregon. We've seen both Penn State and Notre Dame play really well so far. Texas struggling against ASU. How much do you want to weigh in those outcomes when trying to predict how they'll do in the semifinals versus what those teams did during the larger sample of the regular season?
Yeah, thankfully we're getting a lot more games now in the playoffs, so it's a little easier. I mean, obviously after Ohio State did what they did to Tennessee, I mean, no one expected that against Oregon because it's like can't really take all that weight in one game compared to the rest of the season. But Yeah, I think it just depends, honestly, when you compare it to the rest of the year because, of course, I mean, these are a bunch of college kids. Teams change so much as the year goes on. And I think the perfect example is when you look at, say, like the game plan for Ohio State's offense now. I mean, most of the year they would just come out and run the ball, run the ball, run the ball. They want to establish that first. And now the last 2 games, we've seen them come out and basically just throw shots down the field immediately, and they're passing to set up and run, and it's worked so well for them. And frankly, it's what they should have been doing all year: lean on your receivers. But they seem to finally learn that after that Michigan loss. Yeah, I just with Texas, that's another one where I think what they're doing against Clemson and Arizona State is stuff that we've seen all year. So in that case, that's something that I'm frankly just going to expect. Like their run game has been extremely streaky all season. I mean, they put up around 250 rushing yards against Clemson, and then of course struggled to run the ball against Arizona State. And then just their offensive line's been very streaky. They struggled with Georgia. I think Arizona State really manhandled them in the second half of that game as well. So, yeah, it also depends on your opponents, of course. Ohio State destroying Tennessee and Oregon is going to hold way more weight than Penn State destroying SMU and Boise, of course. So there's just a lot that goes into it. But I would say biggest thing for me as I look to see, hey, is what they're doing now different compared to what they did for 12 games of the regular season? Or is this the same stuff we've seen all year? Say like Texas being streaky on offense. Like that's something I'm just going to expect at this point.
Right. And I think that the key thing you mentioned there is the process behind what they're doing. Had they changed their approach? And Ohio State definitely has, leaning on, like you said, what they should be doing all year, taking shots at these insane top 2 receivers, funneling work to them and kind of seeing what happens. Pretty good plan when those 2 receivers are what they've got there. So it makes a lot of sense. And I think that is pretty sticky. It's the performance stuff that I would not be super, drawn into because it is a small sample, but like that process-based stuff definitely does matter. So let's start things off here. We're talking about the Thursday game. We have got Notre Dame taking on Penn State. Right now, FanDuel Sportsbook, Notre Dame favored by 2.5, and the total in this game is sitting at 45.5. It did interest Notre Dame because they were 1.5 yesterday, now out to -2.5. And Riley, these 2 teams have taken care of business through the first 2 rounds this year. So I'm just going to ask you straight up, who you got in these semifinals between Notre Dame and Penn State?
So I wish I had a straight up answer, but a lot of this is going to on Abdul Carter's status for me on this. Of course, he looked like it was a shoulder in the Fiesta Bowl. That's going to be a big factor for me here, especially with what we saw Riley Leonard do scrambling against Georgia. Penn State's going to need the athletes at those edge spots to try to contain him. Of course, there really is no one maybe as athletic as Carter in the country when it comes to defensive end. So that's the biggest thing for me. I would guess that he's going to play just based on what James Franklin's been saying leading up to the game, just stuff like, hey, there's probably nothing stopping him from playing, stuff like that. He didn't practice the other day, but that's something Penn State's kind of done all year. If somebody's, say, questionable or shaky, they'll just kind of sit him most of the week, so it doesn't necessarily mean he's not going to play. That's the biggest thing for me. If he plays, I like Penn State just because, for the most part, these are 2 teams with really, frankly, they're really similar in style. They're both in the top 3rd in rush play rate, top 3rd in the slowest tempos in college football. Of course, 2 elite defenses. They're both top 7 in EPA allowed per play. They're both top 6 in points per game allowed, yards per play allowed. So and honestly, I feel like this 45.5 total may be a bit too high. I think it should be more around 42 in my opinion. So I'm firmly on the under for this game. Even if you look at multiple projection models, they're all kind of around that 42 number. Numberfire has this at about 43 points. College Football Nerds has this about 41 points. So my favorite game line is definitely that under. If Carter can go, I like the money line. Also, due to the fact Notre Dame's 70th in Pro Football Focus's pass blocking grade, and Penn State genuinely has been better defending the run than they have the pass. So if you get into a situation where Notre Dame is going to have to throw it a little bit, I like Penn State's chances of their pass rush getting home, especially if Carter's playing.
Yes, keep tabs on Abdul Carter's status. As mentioned, it does sound like he's more likely to play than not as things stand right now, but not a definitive there yet. Riley mentioned the money line for Penn State. That is plus 114 right now. Total in this game, 45.5. Under is minus 115 there. Do you have a lot of player props posted for this game as well? Riley, what are you seeing there as far as player props between Notre Dame and Penn State?
Yeah, so similar to just my thought on why I would take Penn State money line is going to be Tyler Warren, his receiving prop. I believe it's set at 65.5 receiving yards. I'm completely fine taking the over on that. Now Notre Dame leads the country in EPA allowed per dropback, so obviously not going to be an easy task, especially when Notre Dame has one of the best safeties in the country in Xavier Watts. But this is the biggest differentiating factor between the two to me is we know Drew Aller at quarterback for Penn State is very, very talented. He is capable of pretty much making any throw if he's playing well. He's taking care of the ball all year. So if you get into a situation where both defenses are doing well against the run, which is very possible, if you get into you're going to have to hit some plays throwing the ball. And I'm just way more confident in Penn State doing that. Tyler Warren's he's a freak. He could be, I don't know, top 20, top 15 pick in this draft. I'm completely fine taking that. I could see it getting to really the differentiating factor being Haller hitting a couple of big plays to him. And he's been over 60 receiving yards in 6 of his last 7 games. So this isn't like a number that's unattainable. So I'd say that's my favorite prop for this. Another prop I'm looking at is Riley Leonard's rushing prop, which is at 47.5, and I like the under for that. And that's just because sacks matter for college football. Of course, they count. It's going to take away from your rushing total. And like I said, I think Penn State can get home in this. Notre Dame might have to draw it back and throw it more than they want to, especially when you have Jeremiah Love, their leading rusher, banged up a little bit as well, dealing with a knee injury there. So, yeah, if he gets sacked a couple times, that's all it takes for Leonard to be under that rushing prop. He's been around 30 rushing yards in 3 of his last 5 as well, so it's not like he's just way over this total every game.
Yeah, the rushing prop for Leonard is mentioned 47.5, under is minus 114. Going back to Warren, his receiving prop is at 65.5, I believe. Yeah, 65.5, over is minus 114 there. You mentioned Warren being like an NFL draft, prospect kind of thing. We had Austin Swaim of FanDuel Research put up his first mock draft of the season yesterday, and he had Tyler Warren going 26th overall to the Chargers. He's been going even higher than that, though, in a lot of mocks. I think he was 14th in Jordan Reed of ESPN's mock, so this dude's legit NFL talent. He had 17 catches against USC. He's an animal. And I feel like when it's crunch time, when they need a play, they don't really have a lot of receivers. So when the chips are on the table, I feel like Warren will be the guy they turn to, and they're going to be on the table this entire game.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes right along. I hate just in a close game like this, just saying, hey, this is a more talented team, I'm taking this. But
right
at the end of the day, it's how I feel about Penn State.
Yeah.
They have a guy at quarterback that people are saying, hey, if you change your mind with your decision to go to the NFL draft, you might be a top 5 pick. So
sure,
you got
sure.
that. You got a tight end, like you're saying, maybe going top 15. Abdul Carter, maybe a top 5 pick as well. Yeah. So it's just with the amount of NFL guys they have on this team, it's in a tight game like this, I love getting plus odds for this game.
Yeah, Penn State's always had talent. They just haven't had the quarterback, but they've got the quarterback now. And I think that makes them a pretty frisky team. So Riley is all over Penn State. Again, checking out the Tyler Warren receiving prop, 65.5 over, minus 114. The under for Riley Leonard's rushing prop due to the sack potential. And then depending on the status of Abdul Carter, maybe the Penn State money line at plus 114 and the under 45.5 at minus 115. Let's talk about the Friday game now. That is Ohio State taking on Texas right now, FanDuel Sportsbook. Ohio State a 5.5 point favorite. That's pretty heavy 5.5 too. That's minus 118. And then the total in this game is at 53.5. And tying back to our original question, Ohio State has romped so far, while Texas a bit uneven against Arizona State. They played well early and then let up some massive plays to Cam Scatterbo, which makes sense. We would all struggle against Cam Scatterbo. But has the market fully accounted for how good Ohio State has played, or is there still value in the Buckeyes right now?
Yeah, so this game is easily the more difficult game to figure out for me. I think a quick note on this too that could make this even more interesting is it looks like Texas is going to be hit by some kind of winter storm starting Thursday. It also goes into Friday. They could be getting snow. They could be getting ice. That state completely shuts down if that hits. I'm really curious to see if weather could impact what happens with this game too. I mean, if no fans can travel, you might get into a situation where they have to push this, and then I think it gets even more difficult at that point. Like, who does that hurt more? But yeah, I get it. Ohio State's just been rolling everybody. And I mean, I've seen some people say they would even take like a minus 13.5 alt line for Ohio State. And I don't agree with that. So I think if you are all over Ohio State and you're like, okay, like, you know, they're just going to dominate everybody at this point, like there's definitely value in taking them to cover when I mean, it's under 7. So if you can take them by a touchdown, I mean, I get it. That's enticing. But for me, I feel like Texas and their roster down the line is just being overlooked. I mean, they have NFL guys everywhere too. They're super talented. I obviously haven't been consistent this year. We've seen Texas like really dominate at times, kind of how they started that Clemson game or even how they started against Arizona State. And then they just kind of take their foot off the gas and it gets interesting. So if Texas comes out here and plays what they're capable of, I think we're going to get a classic. Like this should be a really good game. To me, there's 3 teams that have the most talent in college football this year, and it was Ohio State, Oregon, and Texas. So, I mean, we saw how Oregon turned out, but I think Texas is just a more complete team, and they have a legitimate defense to me. Oregon, I kind of had questions about that leading up to that game. But, yeah, I think going back to what we were talking about earlier with just how much weight do you take in the playoff performances compared to the entire regular season, and I just have been really, really shocked by the way Ohio State's offensive line has played so far, especially when they have basically their 2 best guys that had season-ending injury on that line. So it's makeshift. I mean, they had to move Donovan Jackson, a guard, out to left tackle, something he hasn't played his entire college career, and he's a senior. So, and he's been outstanding so far, but it just feels like something where it's like, I'm not convinced that they're going to keep playing this well on the offensive line over and over again. And for Texas, I mean, they're just stacked on the trenches. Still think this is the best offensive line in the country. They could be healthy as well. Cam Williams, who's projected to be around maybe a late first-round pick for them, the right tackle, he was out for Arizona State and seems to be trending in a direction where he'll play for this game. He's been practicing this week. So their offensive line could be healthy. And then on the other side of the ball, their defensive line, they have like 3 guys that are projected to be draft picks. Colin Simmons, an edge rusher. He actually won Freshman of the Year, not Jeremiah Smith. So I wouldn't be surprised if Texas just kind of comes out here and punches Ohio State in the mouth and they're winning the trenches. And I'm kind of leaning Texas to cover this for sure because I think something else to keep in mind is Ohio State's had really fast starts their last 2 games, and Texas is giving up 1.8 points per game in the first quarter this season, which is 3rd in the nation. So if Ohio State's not coming out fast, I think this should be a close game all the way to the end.
Yeah. So not as high in the Buckeyes as the market may be. The plus 5.5 for Texas, a lean for Riley. That's minus 104. Let's talk some player props here, Riley. Any props stand out to you for this game based on the way you see things playing out?
Yeah, I'd say my favorite is going to be Will Howard to throw an interception under the passing props. Obviously, don't love saying that, being an Ohio State fan, but just kind of going back to what I was saying, I just don't know if this offensive line is going to keep doing what they're doing. If they do it again against Texas, where this offensive line just comes out and is physical and dominates, I mean, we shouldn't completely overlook what they did against Tennessee and Oregon. I mean, they obviously had NFL draft picks all over their defensive lines as well. But it just seems to be something that I'm just like, I just can't buy it yet. If they do it again, then okay, like fine, they're just going to be great. But yeah, so if Texas is getting pressure here and you're also not coming out and just putting up 14 points in the first quarter immediately, we could be looking at Howard getting a little rattled here if he's under pressure. We've seen him throw picks in big games before. He had 2 interceptions against Michigan. He threw a pick 6 early against Penn State earlier in the season. So, yeah, I think we could get it. And it doesn't necessarily mean Ohio State's going to lose if he throws a pick. But Texas is one of the best turnover defenses in the country. They're 8th in that, forcing 2 takeaways per game. Tennessee and Oregon, especially Oregon. Oregon's 100th in takeaways per game, so Ohio State necessarily hasn't seen like a defense that can force turnovers like Texas does, and that could be a problem for Howard. I mean, even against Oregon, there were some throws that he like kind of forced, and sometimes it pays off when you're aggressive like that, where you just looks like a perfect ball and it works out. But I don't know if he can force stuff like that against Texas. I mean, their secondary is just all around, it's just great. I mean, they have 2 really good safeties in Makuba and Taft. They're obviously Jahdae Barron won the Thorpe Award, so I wouldn't be surprised if Howard forces one in this game and Texas is able to grab it.
It also does tie into a couple of things you talked about earlier on. You talked about how they've been more aggressive throwing the football downfield. Those are great when got Emeka Ibuka and Jeremiah Smith down there, but that also is more likely to do a pick. And if the offensive line, you expect that there to be some regression there against a very good defensive line once again. Both those things do play into a potential pick for Will Howard. The over for Howard to throw a pick is -113 at FanDuel Sportsbook. So it kind of ties into what you were saying before, where it's like, okay, I expect the game plan to stick of being aggressive, throwing the ball downfield, but maybe not the performance of this offensive line, keeping Howard clean and preventing any chaos from devolving out of this. I think that those two things do tie in well together for this kind of market.
Yeah, and I just overall, I mean, I'll be completely honest, last 2 games I've seen out of Ohio State, I mean, since I've been watching Ohio State closely for, 10 to 12 years now, this is the best I've ever seen them look in back-to-back games. I mean, the way Ohio State's just destroying people, like good teams too. I mean, they're looking like one of the better teams to maybe go on and win a national championship during the playoff era, but we still can't completely forget the fact that, hey, they were pretty inconsistent and struggled some of the regular season. And I just would be really surprised if they just keep coming out every single game and just dismantling people. I can't think of somebody in the playoff that did that after, being so up and down during the regular season. So just overall, just expecting regression. Like I said, don't know if that means they lose, but
right.
Yeah, I think Texas's talent is being overlooked in this. I mean, you look at net EPA per play, Ohio State's first in that, Texas is second in that. So, I'm excited for it. I think it's gonna be a great game, but I don't think they're gonna come out here and win by 3 touchdowns.
No, it should be a really fun game. Should be a pretty tight game throughout. You mentioned how they were number 1 and 2 in net EPA. I also pulled an aggregate of different power ratings for college football. Ohio State was number 1, Texas number 2 when I pulled those before the playoff began. So it should be a really fun game on Friday night. That is all that we have here for today on Covering the Spread. Big thank you once again to Riley Thomas for joining me, breaking down his thoughts on the College Football Playoff Semifinals. Riley, good luck to your Buckeyes on Friday. Enjoy the football on Thursday as well. We'll talk to you once again soon.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me on. Fingers crossed.
Yes.
Really hoping for this national championship.
Just want some fun games. Want some fun games for sure. You can find Riley on X at _Riley8. I am on X and Blue Sky at JimSannes. You can find FanDuel Research on X at FanDuel Research. Back with you once again Thursday. We're talking to Megan Payton about her thoughts on the NFL wildcard weekend. That'll be at 4 p.m. Eastern on the YouTube page. Before that, DFS show with Brandon Gadula, 10 a.m. Eastern on YouTube as well. NFL player props coming your way on Friday. Big thank you to our YouTube producer, Justin Lane, for his work on the video side of things. Thank you, Justin, as always. And thank you everyone for tuning in. Enjoy the College Football Playoff Semifinals. We'll talk to you once again on Thursday to break down our thoughts on the NFL wildcard weekend. This has been Covering the Spread, a FanDuel Research podcast.